Games in FE Part 2, Making Games. So before we actually make a game, I think it's probably worth considering what games actually need in order to be successful. And I present to you here 10 things. These 10 things come from thoughts from Mark Rosewater, who is a researcher and designer for Magic the Gathering, a really popular card game. And we kind of synthesized these and reinterpret them in the context of games in education. So what are the 10 things? Okay, so the first thing is a goal. So what are the players trying to achieve by playing the game? What is the purpose of it? What is the end of the game? Let's use Monopoly all the way through here as an example. The goal in Monopoly is to get lots of property and lots of cash. Okay, that's the purpose of the game. Second thing you need are rules. So what can you do and what can you not do in order to achieve that property and that cash? Rules are really important in a game, but you have to be very careful in an education setting not to have too many of them, which can be a tendency when making your first games. Remember, in an education setting, you have to explain the rules of the games to the players, and if they're too long, it can be very off-putting. So in Monopoly, you go around the board in this way. If you land on a property, you have to pay rent or buy it, etc., etc. They're rules. Interaction. So good games involve the players talking to each other about the game and interacting because of the game. So in Monopoly, players are constantly arguing about who's going to buy what property. They're bidding on things. They're grumbling, so they have to pay rent because they've landed on somebody's property. So that keeps the game going, that interaction about it. Number 4 is catch up. So in a good game, all players have the opportunity to win up until almost the very end. So in Monopoly, because there's so many different property areas, even if somebody's had an early league, so managed to buy a couple of properties and get a couple of houses, there's still the opportunity you could buy other properties, or they could land on your properties and have to pay you lots of rent, etc. So there's still the opportunity to catch up. The next one is inertia. So inertia means that the game becomes stagnant, nothing's really happening. So in Monopoly, just say that one player's got quite a lot of property, got some houses and hotels on them, they've got some money, but they need another £2,000 before they've got the amount they need to win. But they're really just going round the board collecting that money because no one else can really catch them up now. That's inertia, and you want to remove that. The next two are surprise and strategy. So sometimes these are viewed kind of separately in terms of games, and game players are quite adverse to one or to other of the types. So surprise means that there's an element of chance or randomness, anything from a dice roll or drawing cards or something else that happens in the game. And this is designed to give all players something they have to cope with and respond with in the instant, and it can give players who are less familiar with the game more of a chance, those who don't have the good strategy. So in Monopoly, surprise is the dice roll, you roll the chance cards, etc. Strategy is how you play the game, what approach you're going to take. In Monopoly, perhaps you're going for all the stations, perhaps you're going for just one colour property you want to build the houses in. And of course, with strategy, each time you play the game, you learn from your previous efforts and what other people have done, and you can improve yourselves. Fun. So games have to be fun. In Monopoly, you could argue whether that's fun or not. That's your own personal opinion. But the game has to be fun. Now, can you design in fun? Of course you can. But I can tell you one thing absolutely categorically. If you have to explain to the players why the game is fun, then it's not. The last two are flavour and hook. So in Monopoly, this is the idea that you are the property magnate and you're trying to collect this and collect all your money, which you're not really, of course. You're kind of role-playing a little bit. Really just going around the board, building houses, little plastic houses in and collecting cash. The idea that you're this magnate and you're hoarding all your money, that's the flavour. That's what hooked people into the game. And that's the most important part of the game. Without the game, it's just going around a board and rolling the dice. So that flavour, the theme that you've got, and the hook, the thing that you sell the game with, be a property magnate, is the thing that really makes the game work. So all games need those 10 things in different amounts, of course. So if you're going to make a game, you may be thinking, well, I like the idea, but oh my goodness, making a game, that sounds like incredibly hard work. I've got to make a board and cards. Well, you don't have to. I mean, that is one approach, and we'll mention that in a minute. But there are other options. First of all, there's loads of great apps which have got games on them which require very little adaptation in order to be used in the classroom. Here we've just got a few examples like Kahoot and Quizlet. You could use a commercial off-the-shelf video game. So here we've got an example of Assassin's Creed. So obviously there's lots of questions you need to ask yourself about the appropriability, the age range, the accessibility of the game. But many of these games have got things within them that you can adapt to the curriculum. And finally, commercial board games. So lots of board games out there, many of which have got subject-specific themes. So here's two biology examples, some which have very good scientific accuracy, others don't so. But that could be the game in itself. Play the game and actually try and understand how reliable it is. If you're making a game, where do you start? So the first thing is understanding the target audience and the context, not building the game itself. Many people rush into making cards, and boards and thinking about all these fanciful ideas. But you really need to come back to a normal lesson plan first of all before you get into that. So the first thing is understanding the target audience and the context. What is the skill set of the people that you're designing this game for? Not just academic level, but specific background. What's their prior knowledge? How many people are in the group? Are you thinking about something physical, or are you thinking about something online? How long do you think you have in order to actually play the game? Are you talking about a whole lesson, or are you talking about a small part of a lesson? All those constraints need to be identified up front because they will dictate what you do in terms of designing the game. Then you need to define the learning objective. So this is ultimately going to be the goal of the game. What is it you want to achieve by the end of the game? What is the lesson objective? What do you want the pupils to be able to understand? Just like you would for a normal lesson. Then you need to structure that lesson objective. So this is the ultimate purpose. How can I break this down into small steps? Because these small steps could be the foundations of which that you could build your game story around. Okay, so back to Monopoly again. The learning objective is to be a property magnate, but the structuring of steps is, to build up a small portfolio by collecting a few properties, then collect all the properties in one colour, then build up some houses on those, and then turn those houses into hotels. They're the steps that somebody needs to go through. Then you need to identify resources. What do you actually have available to you? And resource must include your time in terms of making the game, because complex board games and testing those do take a large amount of time. And then finally, you apply the gamification elements to those. So you actually build the actual game itself. But with that structure outlined before you, what you're trying to achieve, the fun part, what I think is the fun part, making the game itself, is much, much easier with those things in place. So that's just a starting point for how you can begin thinking about making a game. So that's game over for part 2.